Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me today is Kevin Schultz, VP of National Sales with Sun Theory. Thank you very much for joining me today, Kevin.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Kevin, I always like to start the podcast with a little bit of background. So tell me a little bit about yourself. How'd you find yourself in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I was in the medical device industry for a long time, owned a medical distribution company, and was around a lot of surgeons during the opiate epidemic, and saw patients getting overprescribed. And, I thought there had to be a better way. Obviously, about 2012, everyone started to get turned on to CBD, and really thought that was a better way to medicate these patients. I also thought socially it was a better alternative to alcohol, and really those were my two whys to really start to keep an eye on the industry and eventually, jump in when the opportunity presented itself. I'd say probably about 2014, I started to get in the rooms with hopefuls in Illinois that were trying to get licenses as their medical program came about. And then in 2016, I got my first shot with PharmaCann to come on in and start their wholesale division from scratch in Illinois, and expanded that a little bit out to New York when they got licensing out there, and then moved over to a company called Verano, which had more of a larger role on a national scale that was pretty much all-inclusive, going and opening new markets, managing current markets, and really being the eyes and ears of sales from the inside and making sure we were putting out quality products that met the demand that the market was asking for.
What was the medical device business?
So we sold implants to surgeons, whether it was back implants, spine implants, hip and knee replacement, primarily in the orthopedic and neurosurgery world. We did have some software products that went up into the C-suite too as well. So it was really all inclusive. When you have your own distributorship, you can kind of develop your own product portfolio. So we tried, with the relationships we had in hospitals, we tried to be all encompassing.
So what was it like going from the very heavily relegated markets of medical devices and then moving to cannabis?
Well, it was a moment when there was a need for folks to take a chance on the cannabis industry. So there was this stigma that if I go over there, I'm not going to be able to go back into the industries I came from. My passion was deep enough where I said, I'm in, whether that happens or not. So, Illinois was a very tight regulated market. So it really was craving that type of professionalism and folks that knew how to operate in those, types of parameters. So it was a pretty simple, move over for me at the time.
Okay. Sorry about the mix up on regulated and relegated there. We're talking cannabis here, not soccer. Apologies.
I knew what you meant.
Still, the coffee, sometimes if the wrong person makes it in the morning, it's just not strong enough to get me there by noon. So you're known for pioneering supply chain innovations in cannabis and hemp. Could you tell me a little bit about those innovations, what they are, how they work?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of these companies, when they first started, became the household MSOs, right? So we were, Illinois produced, some of the bigger names in the industry. And a lot of those companies were still trying to figure it out, right? As we expanded so quickly. So, really implementing the right procedures behind the scenes to make sure we were as efficient as possible. One big hole that I've experienced in the cannabis industry is the inability of the various departments all being able to work cohesively together. You have marketing, you have Topco, you have the sales team, you have production, and really to get all those folks on the same page is a giant effort. So really having that experience behind the scenes, coming from the field and sales and then going on the inside, I was really able to understand both sides and build some SOPs that allowed those folks to work more effectively together. On the hemp side, I ended up leaving the cannabis industry temporarily at the end of 2019. I saw the Farm Bill get passed, which allowed hemp derived products below 0.3% THC to be shipped over state lines. I knew that the industry needed somebody who really cared about the longevity of the industry to step in and build those SOPs out on how to safely and compliantly ship that product over state lines. That company is called 357 Hemp Logistics. We became quickly the household name. We were known as folks who operated outside of gray areas and really did a nice job making sure that those folks, their investment was protected. That company ended up expanding internationally, where we do ship high THC flower between medical countries and do quite a bit of importing into the US of tea-free product. So with that experience, I was able to touch all the different components of the supply chain on the hemp side. And now everything's come full circle, where you have these cannabis companies that I originally started with all jumping into, or mostly jumping into, the hemp side of the industry now too. So it's been really cool.
When you say operating outside of that gray area, are there still quite a few companies operating in that area?
Well, the Farm Bill is very vague. And there's been some convenient loopholes that have been put in place, and there's been some things that have been left out that the Farm Bill missed on. And one part is transporting in processed oil, or WIP as they will call it, work in progress product, over state lines to another licensed processor. So crude oil comes to mind, right? Crude oil, when it's in its crude state, can be 6 to 9% THC, but it's going for further remediation, right? There's nothing that we found, although there's some gray areas and some legal perspectives that said you can do it, that was written into the Farm Bill that said you can do it. So there was things like that. And then, the Delta 8s coming online, and really where we struggled was finding that full chain of custody when someone wants to do a shipment, going back to that farmer that had the license to grow, and following the transition of that product throughout the supply chain. By the time we were requested to ship it, sometimes they fell short on that. So yes, to answer your question, there are definitely some folks operating in the gray area, some knowingly, and some because they have to really continue to operate in business, and they should be able to do some of the things they're doing. It's just not etched in law yet.
Why the issues with traceability? Just because there are so many tools out there for seed to sale traceability. I mean, not just in cannabis, but in any industry. I mean, right. Is it a lack of knowledge that these tools are out there?
No, because we all know they are. Blockchain comes to mind. What an amazing tool that would be. And I'm not talking crypto trading. I'm talking the blockchain, where everything lives and there's one source of truth. In logistics in general, forget about hemp. The amount of paperwork that goes back and forth between all the folks involved in shipping a commodity from point A to point B is tremendous. And there can be fraud. There can be documentations that have been edited, and really would make everyone's life easier in logistics in general and supply chain, that there was one source of truth where all that documentation was stored. But yeah, really, you really have to work hard to get it in the hemp industry. And we really took it a passion to getting that documentation right before that truck left, or even went in to pick up their load.
So are you still involved with 357?
No, so right now I'm a board advisor for the company. I still have my ownership interest. We worked on that project for 5 years. Lucky to have really great partners who actually came from logistics. So they've now taken over the day-to-day operations of the company, and absolutely still shipping hemp, still shipping cannabis internationally, and do a fair bit of final mile in other industries, whether it's retail or different brands, going direct to consumer or B2B.
Do you see that company is still, at the early stages waiting for, rescheduling or further descheduling to really open up interstate commerce?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were in deep conversations with some very famous companies you would know in the cannabis industry that are, although they're starting to move over to hemp, they're gearing up as well for, decriminalization and eventually being able to ship cannabis over state lines. We've always said, with my relationships and with the infrastructure we built out of that company, we're ready when that day comes. In the meantime, though, we knew we were early to the hemp game. But we knew for the industry to be able to evolve and have longevity, someone had to step in when there wasn't a lot of juice to squeeze and a lot of money to be made, and set those parameters and those SOPs in place. And that was the risk we took, but we thought it was something the industry desperately needed, which now puts us in a position to be well known, have a reputable brand, and be able to expand as the industry expands.
You mentioned that you launched the B2B wholesale division for PharmaCann. What was that launch like, and what did it entail?
Yeah, so that was kind of late to the game in Illinois. So at the time, most of the shelves were filled in the dispensaries. So it was a very difficult task to go in and replace product that was already on the shelf. So I'm very proud of the achievements of, I think by the time I left, we were in 98% of dispensaries, and doing a fair bit of sales too, a really nice chunk of business. And it was a really cool time because it was early enough where a lot of the famous CEOs that you see out there that ran the various MSOs were literally in their dispensaries, working, and you were selling to them. So it was just a really awesome experience to be able to be that early. But it was difficult to get product in, and folks were still trying to figure out cultivation and processing, and getting everything well, in a well-oiled manner. And so there were product shortages that you had to deal with, and there was just a lot of challenges that you had to be able to be flexible and be able to make sure the customer understood and still wanted to keep you on the shelf. So it was hard, but it was something I'm extremely proud of.
When you made the step up to the top executive at Verano, how did life change for you?
I was on the road a lot more. So that was a big change. Had a young daughter at home, and some of the towns that we were going to weren't always the most exciting towns, right? The cultivation centers were where you won the license. So whether it's far south in Illinois to out to Maryland to Vegas we had a quick stop in Oklahoma when they went live. So that was probably the biggest change, was living in hotels, and then really just having a giant responsibility on a very small team that the founder there truly trusted with the business outside of Illinois. And it was extremely important to go out there and execute. Verano has amazing operations, and they have a way of doing things that's made them very successful, and you had to adapt to that very quickly.
So what do you hope to take from your experience with PharmaCann, Verano, and 357 and bring that to Sun Theory?
Well, there's some priceless experience there. And what I love about the Sun Theory team is I'm not the only one that has that kind of experience, and it might live in other areas, right? So I think we're an extremely well-rounded team, that has been in the field, has earned their stripes, so to speak, seen the good things and the bad things on how to operate. And it's really, the dynamics of the folks that have been brought in to start to scale this company is a group I wanted to be a part of, because I think I could bring some unique aspects to the table, but I also can learn a ton from them. And one big part of that is on the inside, whether it's operations and production. I've been with companies where you outpace them in sales, and to really have a group on the inside that can support scaling, not just in one state, but as we grow into other states, is extremely important. And it gives me a lot of confidence as I'm building my sales team out there that they're going to be able to produce what we can sell.
What is that equation? How do you figure out kind of the right way to scale without scaling too quickly and breaking, without scaling too slowly and missing the market? How do you thread that needle?
Well, I think you have to be really smart with forecasting, right? And I believe that's the sales team's job, is to be able to forecast properly. But I also believe that there's that collaboration that needs to take place between the two, right? We cannot operate in silos and just be responsive to each other. We need to work absolutely together, especially as we start out new markets, or we're in markets where we're starting to scale quickly. So I really believe having those leaders in each of those departments that have great relationships with each other can have hard discussions and also be creative on how we're going to set par levels and how we're going to forecast what's going to happen a few months down the road is extremely important. Ultimately, you're staffing up to those levels, right? And we have to hit those numbers for those folks to be able to keep their jobs. So, when all the different divisions realize that they all play and have an impact on each other, and that we're all truly a team, things seem to move a lot more efficiently, and people work harder for each other.
I think I got a little bit ahead of myself. What is Sun Theory?
So Sun Theory is an expanding operator. They were founded in 2017 out of Denver, Colorado. They're bringing Dialed In Gummies, which is their household product line that they acquired, really from Denver to other markets now, which is extremely exciting. We'll soon be launching in Ohio. And there's some other markets that are quickly behind. They recently went through some acquisitions on the retail side in Denver. They acquired Terrapin Care Station, 3D Salida, Durango Rec Room, and the Roots RX chains. And then, of course, acquired Dialed In Gummies, which is a household gummy line in Denver.
You had talked about the leadership's experience and wanting to make sure that you stay away from the bad things and really go with the good things at Sun Theory. What are some of those bad things you want to stay away from, and what are some of the good things that you want to make sure you nurture?
That's a good question. And it's one of those questions where you almost have to be in it to understand it, right? I've just seen folks grow too fast, and ultimately run out of capital or end up having to sell off those assets. There was a huge land grab back from 16 to 19 that I was a part of, and it was like, we'll fix things later type mentality. And I think folks started to realize they got a little bit farther over their skis than they wanted to. So what I like about Sun Theory is they're being much more methodical when it comes to expansion. And I think that's extremely important. They want to run profitable companies. They want to be careful with the markets they're moving into. And those types of decision-making skills and kind of that mentality is what drives me to want to be a part of this, because they're going to do it the right way.
In one of those previous roles where you said you were in it, were you in that sort of green rush land grab, and did you guys get out over your skis a little bit?
No, because both companies are still around, and I don't believe either has sold off any assets. If anything, Verano and PharmaCann keep growing. But it was more the companies that were around us at the time. There was just such a deep competition for licenses, right? I mean, you had companies that were hiring full teams to just apply for licenses. And, we had companies in Illinois that got the initial licenses that never grew any product. There was no requirements on those cultivation centers to produce anything. So that really hurt the growth of the Illinois market when you had 5 or 6 cultivators producing all of the product for the market, when in fact there were 20 to 25 licenses that were given out. So those folks were just, in it for the quick flip and being acquired. But it really hurt the market. Where I see a state like Florida, where you have to sell product to yourself, it's truly vertical. Although there's some challenges with that, it really holds people responsible to have to produce and contribute to the program. So I really am intrigued by that market.
You had mentioned a number of the acquisitions. What is Sun Theory's strategy when it comes to growth via acquisition and making sure, it's an organic growth and not just bolt-ons?
Sure. So they deeply believe that control and predictability will create positive operating cash flows. So they put a lot into the rigor of operations and growth capital into their portfolio companies, and ultimately assist in their continued development. So that's really the premise of what they're looking for when they go out there to acquire companies.
You mentioned a couple of markets. How do you feel about the state of the Illinois market right now?
I think it's an incredible market to be able to have grown to this level, being such a strict, tightly controlled market from its start, right? And then later in the game coming into the rec market. And a lot of those legacy companies coming out of Illinois' market. I mean, you have Grassroots who sold to Curaleaf, you have Verano, you have Cresco, GTI, leaving a few out, I'm sure. But it was just it's a market that, with the tourism and the amount of people that live there, it's really been a testament to how a market could grow outside of the original OG THC hunters, right? So you had, when I was in dispensaries, it gives me chills thinking about it. You had everyone from grandma in there to the veterans coming out of the war that were addicted to so many different medications to, just your average Joe walking in just to load up for the weekend. And it wasn't so much the THC crew. That market started to bring out different types of ratios of products early on, and folks really starting to see different medical benefits from those products, whether it's focus or sleep or different types of indications that they needed help with. So I really like that market for a lot of different reasons. I see a similar market starting to build in Ohio, where we're going next. I mean, you have 15 million people. Obviously they love THC there, but it's also a market that I feel is similar in the people type of another Midwest state like Illinois, where they're going to be curious about other types of products that the cannabis plant could provide them.
What about Colorado, the Colorado market? Are there any particular headwinds that Sun Theory is facing there?
So we're growing in Colorado. But I will say the market in Colorado has retracted a little bit. I look at 2020 and 2021 as anomalies, right? But if you look at the years prior and the years after that, I would say Colorado might be retracted anywhere between 7 and 10% as an industry. I think you were also all facing headwinds with the economy, right? Folks just don't have that extra money to spend on much, let alone cannabis. But with those headwinds, we've been able to continue to grow, which is extremely exciting. We're coming out with new products in Colorado. We just launched our sleep SKU, which is our award-winning rosin that we're known for in our Dialed In Gummies classic line. And that's mixed then with CBD and CBN isolates, which early on, the reviews are incredible. It's really helping folks go to sleep. And we see that sleep lane as being a huge opportunity. When you look at the amount of products people take to get a good night's sleep, it's a big cake, and we want a big piece of that cake.
Okay. What kind of role does the Dialed In Gummies brand play in that? Will that kind of span all edible efforts?
Ask that question one more time.
So how important is the Dialed In Gummies brand as you kind of like branch out into these new areas of the market?
It's huge. I mean, Dialed In Gummies is a household name. I think there's been a lot of folks waiting for that brand to leave Colorado and go expand into other states. So the early on feedback in a market like Ohio that knows we're coming is they're extremely excited. The brand has the potential, in my opinion, to be $1 billion brand. I think as we start to expand and continue to do things the way we did it in Denver, and a high quality product that's effective, and that's tastes good and has amazing branding, states are craving those types of products. Plus, with our product being rosin, there's not a lot of competition in some of these new markets we're looking at. Most folks are distillate and gummies and isolates as well. We feel that rosin is what really set us apart in Denver, and we're going to continue that methodology as we move to other states.
You previously mentioned the importance of forecasting. How do you look at what has been successful in different states and know what might translate to different markets and compared to things that you might have to tweak in order for it to be a success in a new market?
Well, as you go to new markets, the rules change, right? I mean, there can be different rules around labeling and advertising. And so some of the things we do in Denver may not translate or be allowed in other states just yet. So really the key to launching in other states that I've found at previous companies is just really becoming a student of the game, truly understanding what you're able to do and what you're not able to do, and then developing your plan around that so it can still be effective. So, as we go into these new markets, it still comes down to the relationships you have with the folks you're selling into, the dispensaries. It starts with, obviously the top of those organizations all the way to the bud tenders. And there's just some basic skill sets and approaches that you have to take to be impactful and to be able to grow your market share. So there's nothing like getting down into the weeds and knowing those bud tenders by name and educating them and making sure that they're able to represent your product appropriately when the consumer's coming in. So all of that combined, really goes back into, forecasting what your potential could be in that state. And then the rubber hits the road, right? You got to perform. We expect to do very well in these states for a lot of different reasons.
You mentioned a relationship with bud tenders. What are other tactics that you can take to try and put your best foot forward, make sure you have a better chance at success at the dispensary level?
Marketing, is a big thing. And education is huge. There is a lot of products coming at these folks, and how do they pick yours over somebody else's, right? And how do they, when they're interacting with the consumer at the register, how do they convince them that Dialed In Gummies is the one that they should put their investment in? We're not the cheapest product on the market. We have a really, well-known brand that has a very effective product that's not cutting any corners in production. So sometimes, that commands a little bit of a higher price point. So, it's easy to just go in and buy the cheapest product. But if you're looking for that true experience and a product that's truly effective, that tastes good as well, you're going to have to pay a little bit more for that type of product. So, again, I think it goes back into, educating the consumer through the bud tenders, or if a state does allow marketing inside the store, having that marketing really buttoned up and presenting properly. Consumers can be confused very easily. So just making sure we have a real clear plan of not only education, but marketing as well. And then really having the proper team on the streets. You got to be in these dispensaries. Sometimes reps can fall into order taking when you have a successful product. And, we've been able to sniff that out and make sure we don't have a team of order takers. We have folks that are out there on the streets every day and are constantly trying to add value to our accounts. No matter what industry I've been in, if you continue to add value to your customers, they're never going to get rid of you. So, that's really my MO as a sales leader. Continue to add value.
No, that's it's good. It's refreshing to hear that. It's refreshing to hear that perspective when it comes to sales, and especially recognizing the detrimental effect that people like order takers can have in the long term.
For sure. It's easy to get complacent, right? Especially when you're making some good money. But, when you have the right team in place, you can usually, really do some great things together without getting complacent.
When the marketing rules change state to state, city to city, sometimes village to village, is it difficult to fully invest in marketing efforts when you know they can't be universally used?
Yeah, because typically in industry, you hire one marketing team, right? And they're typically at the corporate headquarters, and one size fits all, domestically, no matter where you go. It's really an art mixed with some science, right? And you got to have the right team that can adapt to the market you're going into. So it's not an easy job, whether it's the packaging needs to change and, they can't do their designs they did in Denver, in Ohio. And I'm just making scenarios up here. But, you really have to keep your eye on the ball. Because sometimes there's some strict penalties if you divert out of those parameters that are in place in those states. So what a plan that works in Denver might not work in Ohio, and might not work in another state we go to next. So you really got to stay organized. You got to stay top of mind on these rules and regulations, and still keep that creative juice flowing, so to speak.
What is Sun Theory's product mix? Is it predominantly gummies? Is the best sale, or is the biggest seller still flower? Could you tell me a little bit about the company's product portfolio?
Yeah, so our product portfolio consists strictly right now of gummy products. So we have our classic, which is our household brand. We have the three different strains: sativa, indica, hybrid. We just came out with our sleep gummy, which I mentioned earlier. We have a product that's called liquid gummies, which is basically a product that's good for mixing into drinks and or drinking straight. It's just a different way to consume, our gummy product, so to speak. And then we also have a 1-to-1 that is a mixture of CBD and THC, which is a great product. What's unique about the classics that the other SKUs don't have is the classics has a variation of flavors. There's a constant rotation of flavors that the industry really enjoys. What we found though is having consistency with these other types of ratio products was super important. So we've picked one flavor that's been very popular for our sleep SKU, for example. It's acai berry. And those products are going to stay the same when it comes to flavors. The other product, the classic, will always have some sort of variation of flavors as different batches come out. And one thing we've done extremely well in Denver is having a small batch type of product selection and working with a lot of collaborations with different growers or rosin producers locally that we ultimately put them on the label as well, which has been really cool and well received in the market there. So we like to really show that we're a team player in the market. We want to play ball with everybody and not alienate ourselves from the rest of the industry. And that's a real cool way of giving back and being inclusive of other folks in the industry, in the market.
Any interest? I mean, I understand that you have $1 billion expectation for the gummy portfolio, but any interest in branching out beyond gummies?
I think it's something that we are definitely keeping our eye on. It's got to be the right fit, as far as what our beliefs are and where we see this company going. So there's a lot of eyes on different opportunities that do come across leadership's desk. And they're carefully considering some things, I would say. But right now, we really want to focus on being a wellness brand and truly focusing on that. So it's got to fit a couple of those buckets that we want to focus on. And if it does, we're probably going to bring it in. If it doesn't, then it's just, we're not going to divert out and chase the shiny ball that a lot of companies do and add 40, 50 different SKUs and pull SKUs back quick. And, I've seen those companies come and go, and we want to be real tight with how we choose to expand when it comes to products.
On the topic of consistency in manufacturing practices, can you describe, even at a top level, Sun Theory's approach to manufacturing gummies?
It's very methodical. It's not quick. There's a sous technique that's involved. Without giving too much of the secrets away, it's very carefully, I would put it that way. And the goal is to make sure that experience for the consumer is the same every time, right? Depending on the genetics that's, making up the rosin, obviously can be different effects depending on the genetics, right? But the way we produce that gummy is very carefully, very hands-on. And ultimately that's created a line of gummies in Colorado that is extremely popular. I'll tell you a quick story. I was just in town in Denver and we were having breakfast, and the waiter came up to us and had a hint from our shirts, obviously who we were with, and just came out and said, "You guys are by far my favorite product to consume here in town." So, and I've heard that numerous times being in state here just for the short amount of time I've been with the company. So that's pretty cool.
Right. Good incentive to keep wearing the shirt anyways.
No doubt, for sure.
Well, because gummies have been a particularly difficult cookie for people to crack, when there are issues with consistency and problems moving into new markets with different climates. Has Sun Theory run into any issues, or are there any apprehensions going from like various manufacturing practices in different climates?
No, I think that goes back to our team. Our team has been in most of these markets they know what to look out for, whether it's seeing the company do it the wrong way or being a part of a company that did it right. So I put our trust in our production and operations team to be able to adapt whichever markets we're going into, just because they've had that experience before.
Do you foresee any additional acquisition efforts on from Some Theory?
Yeah, absolutely. We're actively expanding our brands and continue to look for additive acquisitions in both this consumer products category and retail. So for sure, absolutely.
In your opinion, what can cannabis operators do that'll help them expand beyond traditional customers, get some new faces in the door?
I think it goes back to those minor cannabinoids, right? Everyone knows what THC is. For the most part, everyone's tried CBD. It's about going into those other cannabinoids. One of my personal favorites is THCV. It allows for extreme focus without any raciness of like an ephedrine type feeling, or an Adderall. So that's a big one. I think CBN is obviously caught on here over the last couple of years. Folks are sleeping better. But I'm really excited to see things like CBC, which can be an enhancer of other cannabinoids, start to get mixed into some products. So I think that's going to be where we really see that next layer of consumer coming in the door. I do see a shift away from alcohol, which I anticipated back when we first started this conversation back in 2010. And I see a lot of folks moving to NA beers, and I see there's a need for some products that maybe you can mix with that type of a liquid and ultimately feel a little buzz, but not have that drunkenness of alcohol. So I think as people start to move away from alcohol, you're going to see them shifting more into cannabis as well. You always have the need to help people with pain, right? I think CBD did a great job of that. I think that's just the beginning. Pain is still one of the number one ailments in the world. So I just think with 100 and some cannabinoids in this plant, we're just tapping the surface of where we can go with it.
How do you feel about cannabis beverages as a product category?
Oh, I really enjoy them. They're one of my personal favorites. Obviously, a lot of them come out of the hemp industry at the moment. For me, it's just Delta 9. I don't really move into the Delta 8 category at all. It's just my personal choice. But I really enjoy it. I think socially, they're a great drink. A lot of them taste really good. I see them in bars and restaurants here in Tennessee. And I see consumers, choosing that over alcohol, which is super cool to see. So I think they're here to stay, and it's going to be a huge market.
What are your thoughts on rescheduling, and is it going to get done by the end of the year?
Yeah, I've always said one day we're going to wake up and it just happened, right? That's always been my my kind of personal feeling. But I don't have a crystal ball, and whether it happens with this administration or the next one, and it's years down the line, we'll continue to have that operational rigor and lead the Sun Theory team into the future, and ultimately bring best in class products to the consumer. And that's really all we can control, right? We'll be ready when that day happens. I welcome it. I think it's long overdue. But I realize it's not flicking a switch because there's a lot of political things involved. Let's leave it at that.
Speaking of things we have no control over, what are your thoughts on descheduling? Is it going to happen in our lifetime?
Yeah, I believe it will. Absolutely. Again, it's long overdue. There's a lot of politics behind the scenes that are, causing different folks to make different decisions or delay that. But I believe it's coming. I think as the years go by, more and more support for it is happening. And someday maybe we'll wake up and it happens. But do I think it happens this year? Election year, who knows? Someday I think we're going to be surprised, like I said at the beginning, and it just happened. But long overdue is what I'll say.
I've worked in previous markets where when we're in an election year, it seems like there's always that lull as you lead into the election. Does the cannabis industry experience that same lull, or is it kind of just operating business as usual?
I'd say for the most part, operating business as usual. Maybe if anything, people consume more cannabis during those stressful times.
That's fair.
But yeah, I think it's, we're so far down the line here that you just got to keep operating and really focusing on, seeing the ball, being the ball here, and not worry so much about those outside, factors, although they're extremely important. Don't get me wrong. We just got a lot of work to do to stay profitable and stay in that expansive mindset and continue to expand the right way. So if that switch flips, we'll be ready.
Ohio just went legal with adult rec. Which state do you foresee turning next?
I see a few states on the East Coast and in the Southeast that eventually are going to flip. If I did have a crystal ball, Ohio, we're extremely excited about. That's our next state. 12 million people, 3 metropolitan areas within the state. A lot of consumers. I think that state's going to be huge. So it's nice to see that they had a great first week of rec sales. The sales were really off the charts. We're following the data close and really trying to focus on areas of density to really penetrate that market quickly. But we're anticipating a fast start there.
Okay. What state do you see going last?
My state, Tennessee.
Yeah. Okay.
But what's interesting about that is we have cannabis everywhere. They're selling it at every store you can imagine. There's billboards up, there's consumption lounges, there's food restaurants that serve cannabis sauces. And early on I met with one of the higher ups in Congress here, and he was worried a lot about some of these gray area products making it in and not being tested properly, and all the same concerns I had when we were transporting the product. But really what I said back to him was, you did this to yourself. You don't have a cannabis program where people can follow the rules. So now you have everyone operating in gray areas. So if that doesn't tell you got to get moving, you really should. So we were last, I believe, or second to last to adopt the lottery. I want to say the lottery just started after 2000 turned. So my vote would be Tennessee will be last.
Okay. One thing I like to ask is, especially when people have come from other industries, is it really does seem like the cannabis industry, people grow a passion for it. And, they wind up staying kind of indefinitely rather than going back to another industry or finding a new one. Are you in cannabis for the foreseeable future?
Well, it's interesting because I technically left cannabis, right, to go into logistics, but I was in hemp. So I never really truly left it, but I did leave the cannabis, verticals, right? And although I did some consulting throughout and kind of always had that itch to get back in full time. And it was something I definitely missed a lot. That first run during that infancy of or birth of the multi-state operators was extremely hard. That was 3.5 years of just really intense expansion, and it was a good breath for me to take, and it was a need for the hemp industry to go start the company we started. But I always did miss it, and now that I'm back in, it's super refreshing, and I'd like to say I'm here to stay. But again, don't have that crystal ball, but I feel at home here with Sun Theory. To come back in full time, culture had to be by far the number one thing I was looking for. With a close second, being able to operate and have a great operations team to support the sales efforts, and they really checked all those boxes very apparently when I started the interviewing process. So I feel at home. I'm excited, and I think our story is just getting started.
As an entrepreneur, do you prefer the build, the startup, or, is that your favorite part of it?
I like to say I like to thrive in chaos, and it's part of that build is what really makes me excited. Now, I do love when we start to hit that moment of stability where we're able to go and scale into new markets, but new markets brings their own challenges too. So having that entrepreneurial mindset is super important when you're at the moment where Sun Theory is, because they do want to grow, and you're going to have someone that's able to handle some of that adversity we may find in other states. So it's something that comes naturally to me, and I like to say I'm an entrepreneur right now, operating within someone else's company, and bringing that skill set to the table. So I think it's priceless that I have it. It's going to be tapped into quite a bit, and I'm looking forward to contributing big time to the team.
What should we be on the lookout for next from Sun Theory?
Well, Ohio, obviously. We'll have some new products coming out in Colorado as well. There's new markets right around the corner that I obviously can't mention at this point, but we're on the move, but we're doing it the right way. We want to make sure we're either acquiring profitable businesses and making sure we're all ultimately always operating a profitable business, and stay away from chasing those shiny balls, and that move to always want to innovate new products when it might not make sense, downstream and upstream within the company. So stay tuned. I think our expansion into some new states is coming soon.
Kevin, I really appreciate you taking the time today. But before we get out of here, is there anything else that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about yourself or Sun Theory?
Yeah, I would just, thank you again for having me on. Looking forward to doing more of these and getting the Sun Theory story out there. I think for right now, we're known primarily as Dialed In Gummies, but there is a, expanding operator behind Dialed In Gummies that's putting a lot of effort into scaling and bringing that product to other states and allowing other consumers in those states to have access to this product. It's a great product, and I'm excited to share the Dialed In Gummies product line in those other states with those consumers. So we're in it to win it. We're going to be expanding, and we're looking forward to doing things the right way as we move forward.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it and help tell the story along the way.
Thanks a lot, David. I appreciate you having me on.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Kevin Schultz, Vice President of National Sales at Sun Theory, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we will see you next week.
Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.